Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out at SIG in New Hampshire, and we want to have a conversation with Phil Strider here.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about the SIG P320. And I'm sure many of you watching this video are familiar with some of the controversies going on with the P320. I just wanted to let you guys know up front, I'm not here to defend the handgun. I'm not here to condemn the handgun. I'm here for informational purposes. And Phil is going to help us get to the bottom of SIG's position on all the controversies that are going on. As you can see, we have a number of SIG products sit out here on the table. We're going to talk about some of the videos that have been circulating social media about discharges with the P320 and things like that. And Phil, I want to thank you for being so open. In this trip, we've seen the testing that the pistols are subjected to, and we've seen the manufacturing, the quality assurance steps, and it's all been quite informative for me because it's really, truly interesting. As you know, I've traveled the world, seen a bunch of different factories, and yeah, it's truly impressive. So let's dive in to the P320. Now, as you know, opening the video, we were talking about some of the conversations going on about the handgun.
Right.
And I have a list of questions that I want to go through here, and feel free to expand upon the question and get out any information that you want to share with the audience regarding the P320.
Okay.
So with that being said, the first question I have, and it's not really a question, I just want to kind of go over the history of the handgun.
Okay.
So I have a P250.
Yep.
Right, and that was the predecessor to the P320.
It was.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, and that was a hammer-fired handgun.
Right.
And then it evolved into a striker-fired pistol.
Correct.
And was that clearly it was intentional? But what was the story behind that evolutionary step of the handgun?
Well, that's a good question. So when the P250 was introduced, it was actually introduced with a very similar grip module, if not exactly the same grip module as we see in your standard P320. And it was, as you mentioned, it was a double action only, hammer-fired action. But what made that gun unique was it was one of the first pistols, that was in production that would be completely modular, and that you could take the frame completely out and change the grips. It's one of the attributes that the P320 has been recognized for and is most well known for. And that was an attribute of this gun. And it was awesome. But the downside obviously was in that time frame, a lot of people weren't buying double action only pistols. Polymer pistols were being dominated by the striker fired industry. There were the big three was Glock, Smith & Wesson, and Springfield were with the Glock series guns, and the M&Ps and the XDs. That was kind of the standard, and that's what people had kind of been transitioning to. Law enforcement agencies and end users had been transitioning to a striker fired design. But we loved the 250 modularity so much that we basically retrofitted the grip module and that initial frame design, initial FCU design to accommodate a striker fired pistol. So that's kind of how the 320 started becoming developed. And this is actually one of the first developed model. This is the infamous pre-upgrade model. But yeah, this is kind of the lower that started it. And of course we transitioned into the post-upgrade model, which is slightly different, but I'm sure that carries you kind of into the next question.
Yeah. So just so people know, you can identify the earlier grip modules by the trigger, and the trigger just looks a little thicker. And then you'll take a look at the more current evolution of the trigger, and it's a much narrower trigger with lower mass. And you'll probably find that there are a lot of handguns out there that I call it the dingus, you call it
tab trigger.
Tabbed triggers. I call it a dingus. It's inertial safety. And and so what that is intended to do is prevent dropping the pistol and having a discharge. Right. So the trigger, when you drop a handgun, if you drop it hard enough, it can actually come to an abrupt stop, and the trigger, because of its mass, will continue on down and potentially fire itself. Right. And so that's why the dingus came about, or the tabbed trigger. And you wanted to avoid that, because if you've ever fired Glocks, it gets a little annoying sometimes with that little tab poking you in the finger.
It can.
And it just doesn't give you that same tactile response as a nice, smooth, or a nice trigger shoe that a lot of people like. So
exactly, and that was actually part of the initial design of the pistol. Was we wanted to do two things. We wanted to design a striker-fired model that you did not have to pull the trigger to get the gun apart.
I like that concept.
Yeah, it seemed pretty standardized that striker-fired pistols at the time you had to pull the trigger to get the slide off, and we were. Especially, I was a police officer, we actually adopted a striker-fired model outside of a hammer-fired model later, and we had a lot of unadditional discharges because people were just forgetting to unload their gun correctly, and then pulling the trigger. So we wanted to design a gun that you didn't have to do that for, and you also wanted to design a firearm that you didn't need a tab trigger to pass the rough handling specs at the time. And at the time, everyone was testing to either SAMI or NATO spec. And as we discussed in the video, when we talked about some of the drop requirements, SAMI was a 4-foot drop on a rubber mat. NATO pumped it up to about 5 feet on concrete. So we tested the original 320 to those specs, and we had very good success, no issues. And we actually, in fact, we added another 6 orientations to the original 320 just to make sure. And so when that gun was designed, we had managed to design a pistol that you didn't need a tab trigger on it to pass those inertia-based drops, and that's kind of how we started the platform.
Okay, and so that kind of leads us into the next question I had. So if you guys have watched other videos going back several years, there were YouTubers out there that were dropping P320s and they were discharging. They were pulling the bullet and just putting a primer in the case.
Right.
And when it dropped, it was going bang. And then you had people whacking with mallets and all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so that prompted SIG to respond. And that's when we saw the voluntary upgrade, right? Where if you were concerned with the safety of your pistol, you could send it to SIG and you guys would swap out for the new fire control.
Exactly. So yeah, so what we found out was if the firearm was exposed to heights greater than SAMI spec or greater than NATO spec and subjected to angles that previously weren't tested, there could be a situation where it would force the trigger to the rear, as we mentioned, which would of course actuate the firearm. And of course, back in the prior model year, we actually have at the time, the pre-upgrade model, we had a striker safety, a levered striker safety that would be deactivated by this safety lever here. As you pull the trigger, you can see the safety lever comes up, and that's what pushes the striker safety out of the way.
Right.
But before they upgrade, this was actually this wasn't captive, is what we call the new one. So it was under spring tension to keep it in the down position. But what we wanted to do is, on the upgrade, not only did we reduce the mass of the trigger, but we also wanted to make sure that this safety lever couldn't be moved in any kind of jolt or hammer strike or whatever the case may be. So we actually turned this into a lever that is now can only be moved if the trigger is moved to the rear. Basically, the trigger is connected to the trigger bar actuates the safety lever. So in this pre-upgrade model, you can see I can literally lift it up and defeat the spring pressure. Whereas on the upgraded version, now this I can pull it up. I can pull it. You just got to put a lot of pressure.
Oh, okay.
You got to put pressure on it. But what you're doing at that point now is you're forcing through the safety lever. You're forcing the trigger bar to move by basically pulling the trigger out. You see the trigger moving.
Yeah, you're moving the whole mechanism now.
So I'm now pulling the trigger. I'm just using a different part of the trigger bar or what's attached to the trigger bar to do it. So instead of doing it this way, I can maybe, if I put enough pressure on it, I can maybe get it to happen. And we've actually seen that probably in a video that we might talk about here. But that was one of the many changes we made to the post-upgrade gun. And obviously we did another number of other things. We also lightened the striker. We took weight out of the striker. We took mass out of the sear. We actually added a secondary sear notch here. So in the incredibly very, very unlikely event that everything were to fail at once, if the striker were to slip off of the sear, it would catch on the secondary notch to keep that from going forward. But again, that can't happen until the trigger's pulled and the safety lever, the captive safety lever, moves up and gets the striker safety out of the way. So there's a lot of internal safeties that happen, and we actually have cutaway versions like this so people can actually see exactly what's happening inside the firearm when the trigger's pulled. So yeah, that's kind of the safety.
So this I didn't know. So there is a catch in there. If the striker slips off the sear, there's a secondary catch that will capture the striker so it won't make contact with the primer.
Yeah, there's a secondary sear surface right here. You can see my keys touching it. That's the primary sear surface there, and there's a secondary sear surface there. And actually, we published this video. I'm not sure if it's still on our YouTube channel, but we actually published a pre and post upgrade video where I was explaining where the sear surfaces were and everything. So yeah, if you look at your 320, assuming it's a new 320 with a post upgrade, post 2017 320, you'll actually be able to see the sear. It's actually got two engagement surfaces on it. So yeah, it's we jumped through a lot of hoops, and we were able to make this a reality in a very short amount of time, just to make sure that we could survive an unreasonable drop test. And in fact, after to verify this design, we upped our game to a degree. In fact, what we talked about before, we increased the drop height another foot, and we increased our orientations another 14. So we now drop, as we mentioned, 26 orientations at a higher drop than opposed to 6 or 7 from our competitors. So,
and stick around, guys, because we will do our own drop tests in this video. We're going to pick a random P320 off the rack at your store. And these are guns that are production guns sitting out on a shelf that are in a store to be sold. We're going to grab a random one and we will drop it using the NATO standard just to show you the types of testing that's been done on the pistol. But their standards are even more stringent now.
Yes.
You've evolved those standards.
Yeah. And we take out a lot of human element error too. It's all done mechanically, and you'll see that when we get there.
So one question I have just for the audience, the striker on the pistol, on the P320, is it fully cocked when it's being carried loaded, or is it semi-cocked and when you pull the trigger, it draws the striker back to its complete rearward position and release it?
No, it's not fully cocked, but it's a significant percentage cocked as it's engaged with the sear. So the striker, when the striker's engaged with the sear, it's pulled back. So the sear is, when the sear moves to the rear, it's moving it back slightly just because of the engagement angle surface. Okay. But once that striker's charged and the gun's charged and ready to go, the striker is in a rearward position. So it needs obviously it still needs the trigger to move the sear to the rear to release it. But there's a slight move back just because of the angle of the sear and the striker face.
Okay. So the next question I would have is, the U.S. Army obviously adopted the M17, beat out several other competitors to win the contract. And of course, they had their own series of testing and things like that. So once those M17s went into circulation, I was one of the people that when the Army turned them into SIG, I don't know the backstory there, and that's what I'm going to ask about. They turned those guns into SIG, and then you gave new pistols to the Army. I bought one of those because I'm a collector, right? And I noticed when I opened up my P320, or I'm sorry, my M17, and I looked inside, there was an additional cut inside of the slide that was through the finish that the Army, or maybe you guys had done for the Army. So my question would be, why did the Army swap out their M17s?
Well, the initial reason was we were upgrading their coatings. I'm going to guess, but I'm guessing your M17 is all tan with tan controls.
Yes.
So one of the changes we made were, regarding the function, the actual mechanics of the FCU and how the gun works, there were no changes made. With the guns that were submitted initially to the Army are the same mechanically with regards to the sear and all the engagement and the strikers and all that, all the same. But we did do some changes to the slide in that we changed some of the weights. We basically made the slides a weight that would actually function a little bit better with the ammo we were shooting. So we made some functional changes to make them more reliable, but it was only slide weight differences. It was nothing operational. And if you notice, if you pay attention to the new M17s, they all have black controls.
Yes.
So we actually changed the controls to black. So that was kind of their clean slate approach was, hey, let's just return them all and we'll get the new guns with the upgraded finishes and the black controls and the way to slide. So there was nothing wrong with them. It was
so you're saying that the Army wasn't experiencing mechanical problems similar to what people are talking about on the internet now. It was done for reliability issues.
It was done
to improve reliability with the ammo being used.
Right. So the ammo being used, we actually, believe it or not, we manufactured the M17 M18 to run better with the ammo that was being mandated to use, and we found a way to actually increase that reliability to get that MRBS number even lower by, I think we added weight to the slide, I want to say, but very small amounts. And of course changed the finish to black controls. And that was just their kind of, we don't want to have some guns with tan controls and some guns with black. So they just literally sent them all back and we replaced them with the updated model, updated in that their finishes were different. And they were a bit more reliable.
Okay.
So that was it. Nothing, no safety related returns or anything like that.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, it was purely cosmetic, and
because
wanted to give them guns that we thought functioned at a better MRBS rate, our mean rounds between stoppage rate.
And the reason it might be a point of contention is simply because if I recall correctly, that all happened about the same time the videos were circulating of people hammer firing, mallet firing.
The timing was impeccable, unfortunately.
Okay.
But,
so I think that kind of fed into everything, because I had questions.
Yeah, it was purely coincidental timing. The timing couldn't have been much worse, but it had nothing to do with mechanics or safety or anything. It was just it was literally a finish change, and we were able to make the guns be more reliable with their type of ammo.
Okay. So my next question will lead into what's currently being discussed right now on the internet, and that is the P320 claims being that the gun fires uncommanded. And for folks that don't know what that means, it means without physically pulling the trigger.
Right.
We've seen posts, we've seen videos out there where guns have been claimed to have fired themselves in holsters. I think some of those were in law enforcement circles. One I remember watching, I believe there's an officer doing something in a building and he was kind of bent over and the gun pops.
Montville PD, yes.
Okay, so I've seen that. I'm sure many of the people watching this video have seen that. What was going on with that? And the result of that is that there are lawsuits out there people are talking about. And so, the nature of the lawsuits, I presume, are related to uncommanded firing, or...
That's what a lot of the lawsuits are based on, is the fact that uncommanded firing caused either the gun to fire or caused an injury. So that's what a lot of the claims are, yes.
Okay, and so what is your response to that? I want to know what your position is on that, and what testing have you done? What investigative stuff have you done, and where are you guys at with that currently?
So I'm glad you asked. So this is the question everyone's been asking. Is first, I can stand here and tell you that the guns cannot fire without a trigger pull. And the reason I'm able to say that is because we, along with a number of major police departments and agencies, and as it turns out, a lot of these attorneys and their companies who are attacking the firearm and attacking us, their experts have all come to the same conclusion that they cannot replicate any of these events. And it's funny we mention replicate as in they can't make the gun fire unless the trigger is pulled. Now, with all that said, there are, to your point, there are some videos out there, many of which you can't see a lot. It's very hard to find. But there is a video, and I'm actually we'll send you some stills of that video. Anyone can see them, everyone can see it, and this is probably the best footage that we've seen with regards to clarity and to be able to see exactly what we think happened with the Montville PD case. So for me to break that down and to make it make sense for you, I've brought a number of guns and holsters out here, and namely one of our guns. This is actually the Australian Defence pistol setup with a light, an optic, and this is one of my personal guns, my Glock 45, which, if you're familiar, your viewers aren't familiar with, it's basically a Glock 19 length slide and a Glock 17 size grip. So it's like a carry Glock 17.
Right.
But they're doing away with all the
like a 19X, but black.
Right. Exactly right.
Not flat darker.
And I've actually added my personal light here. And this is an example of a holster. This is actually an example of a holster I used to carry. It is from a very, very well-known and very reputable holster company, and they're great. And I like their products, and I used to carry them all the time. And one of the upgrades that a lot of law enforcement officers are putting on their guns are weapon lights. Now, obviously, as weapon lights have improved, they've become smaller with the same amount of lumens. But this is a very popular model. This is the Surefire X300. And because of the light and because of how it has to fit in the holster, there's always an opening in the holster that will allow for, the light to fit in it. And this is the right holster. This is before the days where they were Glock 45s, but you can see it's a Glock 19/23 holster, and it fits in just like so. I'll do one more clear and check just so we don't get beat up on the internet, but clear and safe.
Oh, that's going to happen anyway.
Safe. I know. Oh, trust me. Hey, trust me. This is great. So we're going to put the gun in the holster. You can see it locks in. It's perfectly set up for this type of holster. Now, what you will notice is the gap between the body of the trigger, or body of the holster, and the side of the trigger guard. And
I can get a finger in there.
Yeah, fingers are. It happens. It would be safe to say that it is quite easy to get a trigger in there and pull it. And I've got big meat hooks hands, but in the case of, let's say, things on officers' belts or seat belts or that kind of thing, or keys, for a key to find its way in there and to pull the trigger is it's not impossible, right? It can happen. But just by keep pulling in, pulling up, and it's funny if you watch the video.
It just went click, folks.
Did it? Well, let's see. Well, there's a trigger.
Yeah, you can see the trigger to the rear.
So it's not it's not impossible for that to happen. Of course, the larger the opening of the holster is compared to the width of the trigger guard, the chance of that happening go up.
Witness mark.
The biggest part of this that's kind of revolutionary is right here. This little floppy piece on the bottom, Cytrel, and what this material does is it blocks finger ingress. We have incidents all the time where someone is wearing a holster, especially on duty, and there's an object, maybe it's a seatbelt buckle, maybe it's a finger, gets in between the sidewall of the holster and the gun itself. Doing so, that runs the risk with all of these guns like the Glocks that are sitting there with no external safety on.
Right.
What we did with this is we built this to where when you go in and grab for your master grip, this index finger comes right up against there. You don't sacrifice anything. When you draw, you're right where you need to be to present and shoot.
Wow.
That grip is very, very revolutionary for us because it completely eliminates finger ingress. You can't even get a ballpoint pen down in there to the trigger guard anymore because of the angles on this.
By the way, I want to go on record. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I will say, after looking at the video, slowing it down and seeing exactly what we saw, which in this case for the Montville PD is we noticed that on the front of every officer's belt, they had their keys hanging off the front of their belt keepers, which in their defense, I also did the same thing. I carried my keys in the front for my cruiser when I was a police officer because we had belt keepers. That's kind of what we used them for. And in the case of the Montville PD, they had either a 6300 series holster or maybe even a 7300 series holster. And this is a slightly newer version. Again, this is clear and safe, no magazine inserted. And this is a newer version of said holster. And again, this doesn't close. It's made for a different optic, but you get the idea. It's locked in. It can't go anywhere. But this one, you can actually see it's slightly better. You know, the gap's still there. Yeah. But and to get a finger in there, you'd have to have. You could probably do it if you pushed hard enough. But when the officer was bending over to pick up the person's feet, you notice as he stands up, if you notice and slow the video down, he actually bumps into the officer to his right, who is holding the suspect's arm, the suspect's left arm. He actually bumps into him on the way up with his holster, up with his body, and the key on the officer to his right, his key was up here on the left side. And if you notice them bump in, what I think happened, or what would make sense for a trigger activation in the holster, is when he was bending over, the key of that officer went into the holster, and as he stood up with the gun, the key twisted into it, and as he stood up and made the gun fire.
I've never seen that demonstrated before.
That's not hard to do. That's literally just dropping it in and pulling it. And actually, I did this in my office, just put a holster on and say, hey, why don't you bend over here? And I was literally just letting my key hang there. We could finagle it in there, and it's terrifying. But it's not just this gun. Now, this is the what people are really not putting a lot of effort into trying to figure out is it's not a gun problem. I can do it with the Glock. I can do it with ours. I can do it with any pistol with a tab trigger or without a tab trigger. But there is a relationship between a gun with a flashlight attached to the frame, that there is a relationship between that firearm and a holster that creates a gap. And if you have that gap, whether it be a 6300 or 7300, there has to be care taken in the equipment you're carrying, how you're carrying it, and it doesn't matter. Guns don't matter. What matters is the system. Now, with all that said, I will applaud the same holster company for coming out with this guy. This is a brand new model. They just announced it at SHOT Show. It's called the Ballast holster. And you can see it actually has a piece of material here in the back. And what this holster does, it actually, it's clear and safe, it actually closes up that gap. This was actually set up for the right optic, so we can close it fully. But you can see that it closes that gap to a point where now you have to force something in there, like physically force something in there to get to overcome that gap. Now, can I, if I work hard enough? Absolutely. But you can see the gap between the holster.
No, it's much smaller.
It's literally, I can barely get the key in. And even when I can, I have to break the holster to make it happen. So forcing it in as opposed to something dropping in, big difference. And so this holster company acknowledged the possibility of that happening with some of their older gen holsters, and they addressed it.
Okay, so that's what my next question was going to be, because I haven't seen this holster yet. And it's interesting to me that a holster company would design something like that. That means they know there's a potential problem. Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. And it's actually a neat host system. It's actually totally modular. If you wanted to carry a longer gun, you can simply pop this bottom piece off and put a new piece on. So it's an interesting design. I love it. And I think more importantly, it addresses a situation that I think we saw in Montville. Now, let's shift for a bit. There's also, claims of guns that are quote unquote going off into holsters that are causing injuries that are not conducive to, where holsters would be pointing. So obviously we look at the bigger picture. We look at what was a person right-handed, left-handed? Were they drawing the gun? Were they in the process of drawing the gun? Were they in a suitable holster? There's so many elements that you never hear about. All you hear is, my 320 went off and injured me, or my 320 went off in the holster. And we can't show any more clear of a picture of what we think could happen if it went off in the holster. If a gun goes off in the holster, it can be possible with certain types of setups, certain types of holsters, certain type of lights. And so for us, it's more important to see the big picture instead of just saying the gun goes off when the trigger's not pulled. No, it doesn't. We've tried everything we know how to do. I mean, we have done everything. The experts have done everything. Our detractors experts have done everything to make these fire uncommanded. And so far, no one can do it. And we've produced over 3 million of these things.
And in your testing, either of firearms from people that have claimed that they're P320 fired uncommanded, or just in your testing in general, have you ever been able to make a 320 fire without pulling the trigger?
Absolutely not. Nope.
And this includes firearms that were sent to you after a presumed accident and everything like that.
Yeah.
You were unable to replicate that situation.
We cannot replicate it in any circumstances. And in fact, when we hear arguments of tolerance stacks and this kind of thing, and this was off and this was off and this wasn't right, this must have been broken. In those cases, what I would challenge folks to say is if there's something wrong mechanically, internally with the gun, if there's some spec that's off, then that should actually be easier to replicate. If there's something mechanically wrong, why can't I replicate it? If you think this part's broken, let's break your part for you, and then we see if we can replicate it. We can't find a situation where we can replicate a gun going off without the trigger pull, especially at 320. And honestly, not to defend any other gun companies, we're not in that business, but I feel like you'd probably get the same results in any major reputable gun company's results. It's just
right. Well, it was interesting that you showed the Glock with the
I carried a
holster
Glock for 10 years.
Right. But people would say that, but then why is the P320 being singled out and we're not hearing about Glocks firing uncommanded?
I think I can answer that. 320s have, I can tell you that since the M17, M18 award, as we've talked about before, we know that people know, the general public knows what happens to a company when a major military contract, especially for the handgun, we know what happens to that company's success and that company's base model. We saw the same thing with the M9 and the Beretta 92.
We did. Slide separations,
right?
Everything.
But you know as well as I do, no one had heard of Beretta 92 until the M9 contract was won. I mean, then you saw them everywhere. And the P320's popularity grew because of the M17 and M18 wins. And more police departments were finding that their officers shot better with our guns because the grip angle and the trigger was better, and it was just a better, more accurate, inherently better accurate gun to shoot. And they became more prevalent. They started seeing them in more and more hands, and more police officers, more and more end users. And it's just a math fact that the more guns you put out there, more guns you put in people's hands, there's the chances of negligent gun handling or holster intrusions, incidents, that kind of thing, they're going to go up. It was inevitable. It's just people are going to mishandle their firearms, or things are going to happen, get into holsters, and as you put more out there, it's just mathematics. It's just going to happen at some point, and I think that's why you're seeing it more with 320. Plus, let's face it, the 320 is very popular, and it's easier to kind of place blame on a system than it is to place blame on gun handling. Of the 14 or so negligent discharges that I helped investigate with the other platforms that we were carrying, it was always blamed on the gun. And we did the same exact test with those systems, and we always found out that it was just the gun handling. It was a gun handling thing. I think the more and more you see of them out there, and the more hands that people get on them, we can't we can't account for how much training or how much experience that people have. We just don't know that answer. And it's that way with any firearm we produce.
How many P320s have you produced, guesstimate?
Guess it'd be over 3.5 million.
Over 3 million of them are in circulation.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's a lot of handguns.
Yeah.
The next question.
What a lot of people don't understand, not to interrupt, but of those that we've have out in the market, the claims of negligent discharges or unintentional discharges, they account for, let me see if I can get this right. Your internet's going to wear me out on this one. 0.00001% of the guns we've made. So basically 1/100%. So it's
Out of 3 million. Wow.
yeah, out of 3 million. So but like I said, the more guns that are out there, the potential for claims like this are going to go up. We're familiar with that. We understand that. But 320's got a big target on its back. We've enjoyed a lot of success in the market, and it's easy to pull against the Goliaths of
Right.
the industry. It's just easy. We know that.
Another question I have regarding sear engagement. Okay, so we talked about earlier about the striker's mostly cocked. So presumably if you didn't have a secondary catch, and if it were theoretically possible for the striker to move forward uncommanded, it has enough energy to ignite the primer. So the question I would have then is, with sear engagement, have you guys looked into the possibility that because of the holster firing, that means the guns are being carried a lot in a police cruiser or something like that, it's being bounced around a lot? Is there any possibility in your testing or in your design engineering, circles, is there any possibility that the sear is just slowly walking off and then something finally it just slips and boom?
No.
Because you have that secondary catch?
Well, we have the secondary catch. We obviously have the spring tension keeping the sear upright, but honestly, the pressure from the sear is enough to actually keep the pressure from the striker is enough to keep the sear in place even without the springs. But the springs keep the sear pushed up. Obviously, the striker itself can't move until the captive safety lever is up. There's just so many redundant systems that must rely on 4 to 5 pounds of trigger to move to the rear. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. We actually have, and I'll send you a video of this, and you can post it for your folks, is we actually have third-party testing of our 320s put in very similar type of situations, vibrations, rough handling, things that you wouldn't believe, that we've tried to see if we can work this off the sear and work the sear off the striker. And as I've mentioned, we've done everything we know how to do, at least on this planet, to make this actuate without a trigger pull. And I think when you see some of the video, and I've actually gotten already approval to show it, and I think when your viewers see that, they may look at this in a different light.
Yeah, I want more information. I want to find out, because I'm not an engineer. I'm a trigger puller, not a trigger designer, I like to say. And so, the questions that I'm asking are questions I've seen posted, online, the questions that I might have. Now, another handgun that is very popular, handgun I personally carry, is the P365. And outwardly, it looks very similar to the P320, but I know that there's differences design-wise.
There are some differences.
Now, were there any changes to the trigger mechanism in the P325, the P365? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's another very popular SIG product. We hear about these, claimed uncommanded firings of the P320, but to my knowledge, I've never heard of anything for the P365.
Listen, I don't want to speak for the number of owners out there, and obviously I don't have visibility of every single claim that's made with or without the P365 or any of our products, but I honestly don't know. It's certainly, if it's happening, it's not as prevalent as the P320, and one could argue because it's not being carried in duty holsters with light-bearing holsters. Right. Yeah. It's being carried by people who carry concealed a lot, maybe is another potential explanation why you don't hear about it as much with the 365s. And we have as many, if not more, P365s in the market than we do 320s.
It's a very popular handgun.
Very popular.
Like I said, I carry it. I carry mine appendix many times when I'm trying to go deep concealment, or if I'm going to be in a vehicle a long time. Much easier to get a handgun out if you need it in an emergency while you're seated with a seatbelt on, right. Carrying appendix. Yep. And there's a lot of people saying I would never carry a SIG product appendix because I don't want to, have an uncommanded discharge into, my nether regions. So,
in those situations, I carry a 365. I carry an appendix carry, and this is a hot take for your viewers and everything. I used to not carry a striker fired gun in appendix carry, even when I was carrying my duty gun, I wouldn't carry it that way because I was an old school hammer fire guy.
Oh, me
my
too.
first gun was an issued revolver. And once when I was here, when I got hired by the Sig Sauer, until I saw the P365 and the tests we put it through, I was also I'll just carry a 238 or 938 for now. And when I saw the testing and I saw everything we did, it changed my mind.
Right.
After that, I thought to myself, okay, I think we're in a good place here. If we can't make this gun shoot doing what we do to it, then I'm perfectly comfortable carrying where I carry, which again, appendix carry 99% of the time. Now, I will say this, I am still cognizant of the system. I'm cognizant of the holsters. I'm cognizant of my clothing. So I love a term that a larger agency uses. They call it a glance, or what do they call it? A tactical glance at their holster before they holster.
Yeah.
Just to make sure there's no drawstrings or buttons or pieces of fabric getting tied up in the holster. Because again, it's just another
happens.
thing that can go into the holster and cause a trigger
Right.
movement. So
And appendix, my saying is fast out, slow back.
exactly.
Right. And people will say, well, why are you looking at your holster? You're in a high threat environment. No, you just solved the problem of
Yes.
putting your gun away. So you can take a look.
Can I tell you?
So I'm very careful when I carry appendix.
Right.
I'll draw quickly, but when I go back, I lift my clothing up and I
take a
watch the gun go in.
Right.
Because it is so easy to get, something into that trigger guard.
I can't tell you how much I cringe when I watch these videos of these speed drawers and speed reholsters.
The speed reholstering appendix really unnerves me a bit.
I just can't watch. And I mean, honestly, I can tell you also that rushing to get back to the holster is just there should never be a reason to do it. Obviously, if there's that much urgency in the situation, then keep your gun out, right? Make sure the threat's gone. Ensure that you're able to move to the holster in a safe way and be able to do a quick glance to make sure there's nothing in the way of it. And these are just standard firearms training stuff that we go through at the academy. This is a place, 6 Hour Academy. We're actually going to be heading to do a lot of the rough handling tests with your 320 that you pick. We fire millions and millions of rounds out of our P320s, and the P320 is our loaner gun for our students. And we stress proper drawing and proper holstering because we know, as we also know from the internet, that's when a lot of these incidents happen. That's when a lot of people are firing their guns. And it happens so fast that they usually will swear they didn't have their finger on the trigger. In fact, GBRS just posted a pretty good video of same thing happening on their range, and it happened so quick they had to slow it down. And he saw the guy's hands pop back up after it happened.
After the discharge. So his hand was on the pistol when it discharged.
Yes.
Okay.
You can see it, finger on the trigger. It was also a very clear video. So anyway,
Yeah.
what else you got for me?
So
Keep coming.
Well, one question. This is something that just recently popped up. There are. Well, let's go through my questions, and I'll add additional questions at the end because I want to get myself out of order here.
No problem.
So we've kind of gone through what types of testing the P320 has been subjected to, but can you kind of explain for the audience, like what is the level of testing that the military, the U.S. military, or any other national groups, any national militaries? So I know the P320 is not just a U.S. military service handgun. It has been adopted by other countries, either in special operations groups or as primary service weapon, and of course LEO agencies domestically and overseas. Mm-hmm. What testing are you aware of that they do outside of the testing that you do? Do they more stringent testing, or have you elevated your testing to higher standards? What type of test has the gun been subjected to that you're aware of that other groups might have done to the gun?
That's a good question. Well, with regarding rough handling, theirs is even close to ours. TOP, there are certain standards that allow multiple different angles of drop, but no one's dropping 26 orientation. So our destructive testing or our drop testing is more stringent than anyone's. Now, with regards to hot, cold requirements, mud, sand, there are additionals. I think they have one called over the beach testing. I think
Submerge, bring it up and immediately fire it. Yeah.
There are some specific tests like that they require that we don't in the commercial industry, but we still do hot and cold testing. We still do a level of salt fog. Granted, there could be situations where military is requiring a longer time in the salt bath or more exposure, that kind of thing. Sand and dust mud number 5, mud number 7. We have different levels and layers of mud we do for commercial testing. So we're putting our commercial guns through very, very similar testing, but there might be certain specs that might be different. Sand drag's a perfect example, but all in all, when you buy a 320, you're getting a gun that's been through, as far as rough handling, has been through more than the military's guns have been, and as far as all the environmentals, it's been through very, very similar. Now, there's going to be some layers of difference, but with regards to the main
what I'm getting at is that there's been a lot of testing done to the gun that I'm aware of.
Exhaustive testing.
Right, and it's other militaries doing the testing and things like that as well, on top of the testing that you do.
These are third-party testing. When we're not doing it, they're doing it.
Right, and they're still adopting it.
Yes,
so
still adopting it, still using it.
I find that interesting because of all the controversy. You'll see, well, this department said they're not going to issue them anymore, and then this department just adopted them.
Right.
So it's just kind of all over the place. It's kind of hard to filter through, which is why we're here.
Listen, all we ask, and we're never going to judge a police department or organization for making these type of these decisions, but all we ever ask is that if you're making a decision on behalf of a state or a training center or a shooting range or a police department, all we ask is that you base your decisions on the facts. And don't base it on what you're seeing online or a lot of the claims you're seeing online. It's unfortunate that we've kind of gotten down this road of, and I know that there's going to be a lot of angry users out there, but we've gotten down the road of, if I make a mistake, whether I know I made it or if I didn't know I made it, but if I make a mistake, it now seems to be the easy path just to, is that a 320? We even heard that on a video. Well, let's blame it on the gun. Let's blame it on the gun and ban it. Instead of saying, what's going on here? What were you using? Hey, first, let's get the most important thing out of the way. Are you okay? Is everyone okay?
Right.
Let's establish that first. But then let's actually take a look at the system you're using. What are you using? Is your holster compatible? Is it not compatible? We've seen a lot of those where people are using incompatible holsters with incompatible guns and so forth and so on, and that could create an issue. I'm not saying that's what's creating it. No, but it doesn't help. And I think it's just become an easy thing to point to. So all we ask is that if an agency is thinking about that or a range is thinking about that, do the same thing you're doing. Call us, ask us questions, come by, visit the academy. Let's find it. We want you to see.
I've been surprised at how open you guys are to having people come in to show us everything.
Weird. It's like we almost have nothing to hide.
Well, I will say, that I was thoroughly impressed with the open door policy, right? And look, I've been critical of firearms. It's my job. I'm supposed to be a consumer advocate. But knowing that about me, you still opened your doors to me and let me come in. Now, of course, I carry SIG products. There's SIG products I love. But of course, I was one of the critics of the P365 when it first came out, things I wanted to see changed. And to your credit, you changed most of those things and things I didn't even bring up. So the products are constantly evolving. And now the P365 is one of my favorite carry guns. But I knew when you guys came out with it, it was going to be a game changer, right? Yeah. It had done things that I hadn't seen done before. And sure enough, the competitors, started copying the recipe.
Yeah.
Another thing that came up more recently was about the owner's manual. Okay. Yeah. So just before it came out, I started seeing posts about, oh my gosh, SIG changed its owner's manual. Now they're telling you not to carry your gun loaded.
Right.
And then, and I saw that and I thought, well, that is suspicious. Why now? But then I started looking at some of my other owner's manuals, Smith & Wessons and stuff like that. I'm like, they say the same thing. And in my mind, and I want you to answer the question, but in my mind, that's lawyer speak. They're selling a dangerous product if it's mishandled. And so half your owner's manual in any gun you buy is don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And I have yet to find a gun manufacturer, and it could be out there. It could happen. I just haven't read every owner's manual.
Right.
Kind of that bad.
Funny you should mention that.
But there very rarely will you find a gun company that manufactures a firearm saying, "Oh yeah, we highly recommend you carry this loaded."
So
because you don't know who's buying the gun and who's carrying it, right?
It's funny you mention that. I'm glad to address it, by the way.
Okay.
So first off, I'll say, when we changed our manual, it was what we have to keep in mind, and what we're trying to keep in mind is that we don't know the philosophy of use, as it's a catchphrase that's out there now, or the training, the extent of someone's training or the extent of someone's experience when they buy this firearm. Okay, so when these owner's manuals that you see that have all these crazy languages in them, and I actually have a couple of screenshots from another one from firearms manufacturers that will remain nameless, but that's a picture of my car that we saw earlier. That's a nice one. So what we'll find is this language is written, not from us, but from everyone. This language is written in a way that if a brand new shooter buys a firearm, like a brand new shooter buys anything that they don't understand, we have to take for granted that they're going to read the owner's manual and use that as a guide on how to actually operate this firearm, from the loading of the magazine to how to actually load it, from start to finish. We have to take that into consideration. And what's interesting about our owner's manual is it actually doesn't say what everyone's saying it says. What it's saying is it's an education piece in that part when we talk about the manual safety, to let people know that the most effective safety would be to carry around not in the chambers. Basically, the language says, and you can put it up on the screen to see exactly what the quote is, which is not arguable. Look, if you don't have experience carrying a firearm, if you're not fully confident in your ability to the number one rule, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire, then maybe an empty chamber is the way you maybe should be carrying if you're going to carry at all. Maybe the safest way is not to carry it until you get your training up. And I'm not saying that's what we're saying. What I'm saying is we have to take that into account, that based on your ability, that's an option. Now, with all that said, Sig Sauer does not endorse carrying a method of carry. If you're a law enforcement agency, if you're in the military, if you're a professional end user, or if this is your philosophy of use, if you carry around in a chamber, it's perfectly safe. It's perfectly fine. We're not mandating. We're not putting language out there that says you shouldn't carry this gun without it around in a chamber. We're simply saying there's an option that's even safer. And if you have bad gun handling and you put your finger in the trigger when you're not supposed to, in or out of the holster, and there's not a round in the chamber, there is a 100% chance that the gun's not going to go off. But we're not adopting other language. Let's say, here's a great one: always keep and carry your firearm with an empty chamber until you intend to shoot, so your firearm cannot be fired unintentionally. Others caution: the recommended carry condition of your pistol is with the chamber empty for good safety practice.
Is that from your manual or something?
No, those are two quotes from other manuals, major manufacturers who make striker-fired and hammer-fired guns now, and just like ours, it's in every manual they make, every owner's manual. So to your point, you're right. It is, I would say, legal language is a broad term. It's just language that helps accommodate all levels of use, all levels of ability. And we just want to put the information out there. And if people interpret that language as saying Sig says not to carry the gun without a round in the chamber, that's not what we're saying at all. Okay. I carry my firearm, my 320 and my 365 with rounds in the chamber. Do I know people who carry around out of the chamber? No, I don't, but I'm sure there are those out there who do. So let's put that out there now. You're right. The language is the language because we don't know the level of experience people are going to be buying these guns at, and we want to be covered and be able to give them options of, hey, you want another level of safety, here's an option as well. So that's kind of that.
Okay.
But yeah,
that's the extent of my questions. I thank you for answering all the questions that I had. I know some of them probably a little uneasy. It's like, oh, here we go.
Not at all. We have nothing to hide, Tim. Nothing to hide. And I love talking about this. In fact, I actually did a video that we're going to be putting on our channel to kind of explain a lot of things we talked about. Mm-hmm. It's actually going to go through all the channels to get everyone's approval, and we're going to put something out there as well. So, because we want people to know the truth, and we have been in a position to where this is a slow moving process, in that when someone makes a claim against the P320, there are legal channels they go through, and there's obviously a limited amount of discussion we can have regarding an ongoing case. So by the time that case finally gets around to either being overturned, or we're saying, well, their experts couldn't make it happen, or person just admitting they messed up, which happens, it could be 2 years, 3 years down the road. And that's a long time to just have to sit here and go, yeah, we're just going to wait this one out. So now we're in a position to where we can now start talking to people. I've been given approval in this new position I'm in to kind of start to educate people and let them know, here's what's really happening. Now, comment section, I know you're going to wear me out. I work for the company. I get it, but I'm a police officer, or was a police officer. I will put my reputation at stake. I'll be willing to bet the nearly 1,200 law enforcement and military veterans out that work for this company, they would base their reputation on this as well. That if we knew there was a problem, if we thought there was a problem with this model, a pistol or any firearm or any product we made, we're gonna take a beeline straight upstairs to the C-suite and start talking about it. And
Well, here's one thing I know about SIG, not to cut you off. One
No,
thing I know about SIG, and some may see this as a, a negative thing, but I like the fact that you're constantly evolving the product. Now, you don't have A1, A2, A3 generally, so we don't know where we are in the evolutionary process, but you're constantly making changes. I know just in the 7 or 8 P365s I was buying, I could see those changes taking place in the design, right? In the striker assembly and things like that,
Right.
Addressing the striker drag. So I know that you guys are constantly doing changes. It would be insane, and I'm not trying to defend SIG guys, but it would be insane to me with all the changes you're making to address anything that you want to, any improvement you're trying to make, it would be insane to me that you would be like, oh, let's slide in a change here and fix this problem and just make this go away.
we can't even make a change to our owner's manual without it
Right.
being posted
Yeah.
2 hours later. So for us to make any kind of mechanical change, it would be crazy. Now, I will say that, a lot of people look at that as beta testing, and just because we come to market with a firearm, a new 365 or new anything, we don't stop testing it. We don't just punt it and say, you guys figure it out. We're still testing the guns. We're still running them through the case paces and trying to make improvements as we go. We're not using, we do value our customers' word, and we do like to hear from them, and we like to, we want their feedback, but we don't just stop. We're not just washing our hands and being, oh, we're done with that one. So let's move on to the next one. No, we're constantly out there on the range. To Lindsay's point, 3 million rounds a year we're putting through these guns.
Yeah.
And that's ammo that we're making and that we're putting back into the test. So that's not ammo we're selling. We're making it, we're bringing it out to the range, and we're testing them. So for us, testing never stops. And to your point, the development never stops. Our goal is to keep improving the product, to make it better. And you do
do that.
We're happy to say that right now the 320 it's taking a lot of heat, but man, it's the toughest, most tested firearm we've ever made, and out of necessity, which is fine. We stand, and that's why we stand behind it, because we have guys who that's their job, is to sit here and just beat this gun to death. And
I've seen it.
and and it's just it's great. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we can put some of this out there. And obviously, we're going to address a lot of the other things in our video as well. And we just want the truth to be out there. We're not trying to turn people. There's always going to be people who hate us, and people who are going to be thinking we're covering up. And there's no changing that. But there are going to be people on the cusp, people who really want to know the truth, who may just not know, or I wonder, because if someone tells you the sky's green enough, you'll start taking another look.
Is it?
Yeah. It may kind of greenish tint maybe. So we want to make sure that we're giving people the information they need. And this is awesome. We're glad you could come. And we invite any other naysayers out there. And not that I'm calling you a naysayer, because you're not, but we challenge you to come out and do the same thing Tim does. And we have nothing to hide. We'll show you whatever you want to show. And we're glad you can make it. Thanks for coming.
I am a testament to that. You guys opened the door for me and allowed me full access to everything, showed me all the production, showed me all the testing. And it was very eye-opening for me. I'm very impressed with the facilities I've seen here. And I've toured manufacturing facilities all over the world. And I will say that the level of manufacturing I see taking place here and the growth is truly impressive.
Oh.
And I want to thank you again for opening that door up for me and giving me that full access so I could, share this information with my audience. So greatly appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Thanks for coming.
All right, thank
Thanks
you.
for watching.